Glenna Bloom, and I'm going to talk a little bit about one-room schools. I was sort of tickled when they asked me about that because I did attend a one-room school in Bloom Township the last year that any of them were opened in Clearfield County. And I went to Goff, which is, we're here in Greenville right now, but Goff was on 219, not far from where Echo Glen was, off of the road a little bit, and about halfway between Grampian and Chestnut Grove. My teacher there was Elma Thomas, and it was a 6th grade one-room school. I don't remember a lot about it, but some things that I do remember were when we were being taught by Mrs. Thomas, we sat in the front row. Other times, though, some of the older students helped us. And I remember the coat room, and we every one-room school had a coat room where you put your lunch. Of course, there was no school lunches. And our bus for that was Pat McCall's station wagon. They, like I think most of them, had a rather large schoolyard. And in that case of Goff, there was woods near it. So during recess, we played a lot in the woods. Mrs. Thomas rang a handheld bell when recess was over. Music and art we still had, but they came about every other week, I believe. Some earlier, probably that did not happen, but that was getting pretty close to when everybody was going to the grade schools. I think Goff had a pump in the yard for water. Some of them did not. And then Goff had 2 outhouses, but they were pretty far from the school. They weren't very close. And in the wintertime, that was kind of a long walk to get to the outhouse. So that's kind of my memories from Goff. Until 1803, schools were private. And actually in Kerwinsville, they feel that was the first school built in Clearfield County, a log cabin. And it was followed by, in 1806, Paradise in Clearfield. There was also a private home in Clearfield that built a log school in 1814. In 1817, Luthersburg built one, and in 1820, Grampian. Now, the last log schoolhouse was removed in 1886, and that one was in Ferguson Township. In 1870 to 90, there were thousands of wood frame schools built. Often these schools did double duty. They were churches, they were community centers, they weren't just a school, they were sort of like the same thing you see on When Calls the Heart, if you watch it. There were 3 core studies, which were reading and writing and arithmetic. There is a song about that too, that if you know. Now, the teachers themselves were jack of all trades. They were the school nurse, they were the teacher, they were the psychologist, they were the janitor, they were the music teacher, truancy officer, and their salaries ranged from $18 to $25 a year. If you were Mrs. Thomas, she was also responsible for shoveling the path down to the outhouses. She was responsible for firing the coal furnace over the weekend. Because if she didn't, it was pretty cold in there on Monday morning. Now, students also had some jobs like raising the flag and banging erasers together to clean them. And in Clearfield County in 1854, there were 4,893 pupils, 75 male teachers, and 39 female. By the early 1900s, though, most of those teachers were female. If you, back in those days, when you finished 8th grade, you could take a teacher test. The other thing that would happen with that was you would go summers to one of the state normal schools, which became the state colleges like Clarion and Slippery Rock and Lock Haven. And basically, from what I read, you could do that 2 summers and then you were a teacher. In 1834, there were laws for schools in it. They basically were requiring counties to pay for things and adding taxes to them. Some schools had option not to accept that. So in 1835, 17 school districts in Clearfield County, of the 17, 8 accepted, 9 did not. By 1854, they also required to have a county superintendent. Dr. A.T. Shriver was who was hired for Clearfield County. The first year he was superintendent, he was paid $200 for that year. And he was said to have said he didn't make enough to feed his horse. So then the next year, in his second year, they paid him $300. Now, there was a study done, and I believe this was in Texas, about the performance of one-room school students. Students under third grade didn't do as well as their counterparts in grade schools. However, from fourth to eighth, those students did better and outperformed their more modern counterparts. The study was kind of swept under the rug, and schools kept getting bigger, and there were more and more less and less one-room schools, more and more grade schools. They thought in that study that there were probably 2 reasons for them doing better in those older grades. One is if you take a teaching degree, they're going to tell you that you learn more when you teach something than you do when somebody's teaching you. So because of those older students helping younger kids, it probably also helped them learn. And then the other thing was you worked at your own pace. So if you were doing third grade work and you were in first grade, you went up front with the third graders, maybe for math and not for reading, but it was much more of a based on mastery rather than age. 1963, which was my year of first grade, was the last year that any of the one-room schools were opened in Clearfield County, and as far as I know, the only 2 were here in Chestnut Grove. Now, just an aside from that with Mrs. Thomas, one day I was talking to my Uncle Chink, who attended Hibernia schools, actually my great uncle, and he was there probably between 1914 and 1928. And I was talking about having Mrs. Thomas as a teacher. I had her in first grade, plus I had her again in 5th grade at Luthersburg. And he said, I had her too, which sort of surprised me. And I got to thinking about that. She probably started teaching. She was born in 1903, but she was probably teaching by 1915. And she had me in 1963, and then again 5 years later. She taught 50 or more years of school, but I kind of thought that was funny that she taught my great uncle and also taught me. Back to Greenville. Greenville was kind of very near and dear to my heart. First of all, it's beside the church I've attended my whole life. And then the second thing is my granddad, Wilbur Bloom, spent quite a few years teaching in this school. So when I stand here and look at the actual blackboard that he wrote on, that's kind of a nice thing to think of. I do have quite a few pictures of kids in this school in the 20s and 30s, one in 1906. And the one interesting thing about that is most of those pictures, there's 20 to 30 kids in them. The one in 1906-07 actually had 41 children in it. And the reason why I believe, my Uncle Glenn wrote a story about Bloom's Run stone quarry, and there was a stone village down over the hill that the stone cutters lived in. And what he has in that story was in 1907, the year that quarrying ended, there were 80 stoneworkers' children that were enrolled in Greenville School. Now, they didn't all come at one time. They were mainly here to learn English, and they would maybe come 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and they must not have all came on the same day, but it's hard to imagine having 80 kids in the classroom plus the 20 or 25 that were already here. The average pay for Bloom Township schools in 1931 was $40 to $50. And at that same time, Kerwinsville was $150. The heat source in here was in the back corner where we still have a furnace. And the one thing about this school was there was no water pump. So if you went to school here, one of the student jobs was to walk over across Greenville Cemetery to Dick Thomas's house and bring buckets of water to the school so that they had water here. This school did not have a handheld bell. It had a mounted bell that was bigger, and it was mounted on the outside, the front door. And then I did bring two things. This was my granddad's flute, and I believe at the most of the time that he was teaching, it probably would have been at a time that there were not music and art teachers. The one-room school teacher was responsible for that. And then I don't know how well you could see this, but this is his little pitch pipe. And he was a music person. He was song leader at Greenville Church for a long time. So I'm sure that was one of the things he enjoyed teaching. His wife also was a teacher. She taught in Rockton and I believe maybe Helvetia a year. However, she taught at a time that when you married, you had to stop. So she only taught, I think, 3 or 4 years. Okay, so this is the pitch pipe that I talked about, and it has little notes on the top of it, like C and D and E and F and whatever. So just to show you, it still works. And that's pretty much what I know about one-room schools.